Becky Abrams is a longtime homeschooling mom in the Rogue Valley of Oregon who started a parent run homeschool co op in 2015 with about 40 kids. Today, that small co op has grown into Arrows Christian Academy, a drop off K 8 hybrid microschool homeschool program with nearly 200 children and 25 staff members in now two locations. Homeschooled students attend age specific classes 2 days each week with trained classroom educators, and then spend the remaining few days at home or out in the community as homeschoolers. Arrows continues to grow, attracting more local families in rural Southern Oregon, about 4 hours from Portland, who value a high quality, faith based educational program offering the freedom and flexibility of homeschooling with some of the structure of standard schooling. As she delegates more of Arrow's day to day operations, Becky is now helping other education entrepreneurs across the country to create similar learning models through her website, nonprofitedsolutions.com. I had the chance to meet Becky in person and to visit Arrows when I was visiting Southern Oregon and seeing the growing cluster of education entrepreneurship in that area. And it's so great to have Becky with us today. Becky Abrams, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and share about what I do.
I'm so excited to have you here. And I definitely want to get into your journey as an education entrepreneur and building this incredible program that continues to grow and flourish. But first, I'd love to hear why you chose homeschooling in the beginning. I guess, what was your path to choosing that particular educational approach for your children?
Yeah, it wasn't happy to share. It wasn't maybe as glorious as some. There was no light bulb moment where I realized that this was the wonderful opportunity that I had with my kids. I had that later. But really our family values we've always wanted to have our kids in faith-based education. So I have three older kiddos that are now young adults. And at the time they were middle elementary between about grades 3 and 6. And I was working to pay for private education. And then, obviously my husband was working to pay for the bills, but it's just impossible to do both usually on one income. So I was working, and they were in school. And then we ended up being blessed with a baby. And then shortly after, another baby. But there's a 9-year span between my third and my fourth. And when my fourth, Jeffrey, was born, I ended up trying to work from home. We tried a whole bunch of different avenues to keep the kids in private school. And it was just too much. It was too stressful and too much pressure and responsibility. And so I figured, I want to be home with the baby, and that means there's not an income to pay for private education, and I'm home. So let's do that homeschool thing that I don't know anything about. And I didn't know anybody that did it. And there was kind of a dying homeschool group in our valley, so there wasn't anything really thriving to get connected to. But that was definitely the catalyst that pushed me into it. And I look back on it now and think, that was what it took for me to be willing to do it. But I'm glad I did.
Yeah. And so, what were those sort of early years like for you with homeschooling, and how did that potentially lead to creating your co op in 2015?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. There's lots of homeschooling looks different, obviously, for everybody. And so sometimes I think people have a really generic view of like, okay, homeschooling looks one way, especially obviously if you're not a homeschooler. They just envision homeschooling looks like staying home 5 days a week, at your kitchen table, in jean dresses and like 12 children and making your own bread. And like, I don't embody any of that. So I did not stay home well. And, I had a baby, so you're kind of stuck at home for a season. And then I had all these big preteen boys that I had brought home from being involved in, full-time private school. And like my oldest was already into sports. And um, it was a really big culture shift for our family. So it was good. It was, like I said, I did realize, once we got into it, maybe a year or so into it, that my role as a parent, like there's so much more opportunity for me to participate in their lives, like not just in their education, but like be an active part of their life. And with having them in private school, you kind of feel like, well, they're in an environment that aligns with our values. And so there's just this mentality that as a parent, they can do that. And then, they go to church. And so they're learning about our faith at church. And I was young at the time too. So I hadn't adopted or recognized that potential. Like I, as a parent, can and should be more involved in my children's lives and in their education. So I had that realization um, as we got into it, and that helped a lot because it's hard. Like it's hard to take three preteen boys and have a baby, or even one child and take them home and decide to homeschool. There's a lot of the learning curve can be high. Um, and like I said, there wasn't a lot of connection or potential opportunities to connect to in our valley. Um, so to answer your question, it was, I think, about 3 months into homeschooling that I realized we got to get out of the house. This is not going well. Um, and we were all losing our minds. So I started a field trip group. I just thought, let's just do field trips. That sounds like fun. We should do something fun. So I started a field trip group on a platform that's not even around anymore. I can't remember what it was, but there within like 2 or 3 weeks, there were like 75 families that joined, and we're not in a huge area, we're in Southern Oregon. So I looked at that and thought, okay, clearly I'm not the only one wondering where the people are. Like, where's the connection, the community? So the field trip group went on for that first school year when I was homeschooling, and it still wasn't meeting the need because it wasn't the same people every time. And so my kids were not making friends. We weren't connecting. And so by the January, February of that school year, I started looking into some type of regular meeting, like where we teach each other's children and we teach classes to each other. And I did not even know that that was actually like a thing. And there are books written about it that tell you how to do that. So I found a book, if you search enough on the internet, I found Carol Topp's book on how to start a homeschool co-op, and downloaded that. And we very quickly went from a field trip group to like a 501c3. I was able to recruit some of the ladies that had just joined the field trip group to join our initial board. And we started planning for the co-op for that fall. So it was definitely a freight train. Um, but that's how I work.
And so with the co-op, what was that like? Because I think people might be curious, especially parents who are listening, homeschooling parents, if they want to create a co-op, and especially with your
Mhm.
story of a small co-op ends up becoming a 200 person hybrid homeschool program. But what did that co-op look like in that fall of 2015?
Yeah, for sure. The co-op actually is still operational too, which is fun to note. They just finished the ninth year. I run the academy side, that we'll talk about. So we don't actually attend, and I don't run the co-op anymore, but it still happens. It's still part of our organization. So I love that. I love that it's still going. But yeah, so it still operates very, very similar to how we started, which is all parent run. So it's all volunteer, even the director role. Um, which, if you are a small co-op and you're not dealing, you're dealing with parent run, you're not paying teachers and things like that. The director role can be a fair amount of work. And there's always this like, why don't we just pay a director? So that's a whole different ball of wax. And it does get really tricky to where these types of co-ops, they really work best if everybody is volunteer. So that's how we've always run in that regard. And the director that took over after me 4 years later has done a wonderful job of delegating even the director role so that to really try to make it manageable for everybody. But yeah, it's 3 day 3 classes, 1 day a week. So they meet on Mondays and they have 3 class periods. They meet for like a chapel group time right at 9. And at 9:30, they start 45-minute class blocks. And the classes are initially, especially the first few years, they were definitely more enrichment, supplemental, things that are, art and even music. If you have, it's all about what the parents are willing to teach and what they're passionate about. If you can tap into what they're familiar with and passionate about, then the classes are amazing. Instead of like, we want to have this list of classes, who will teach them? If you put it out there, what are you trained in? What are you familiar with? What do you like to do? So we've had just a full gamut of classes that parents have offered, gardening and bread baking and wood burning and art. We have music, recorders, just a whole gamut of theater and then we have moved into more academic classes too, as moms are realizing like, okay, there's a lot of potential here to do more with it. So science, a lot of science, hands-on science types things too.
Mm.
But yeah.
And do I recall correctly, Becky, that there's about 75 students in that co-op today?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's looking like enrollment is higher this year, which is exciting because our academy program continues to grow. And then the co-op is also growing and they're adding high school classes this year too, which is really cool.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the academy. This is now your nearly 200 student program. But first, I want to just hear, why do you think there's been this growth in homeschooling, particularly in your area? What's been going on there that you think might be leading to more families choosing the homeschooling approach?
Yeah, well, and it probably looks different to some degree across the nation. So I can tell you for my area. So we're in like more rural Southern Oregon. It's not super small. There's, a few thousand, 100,000 people in our kind of in this region, the Southern Oregon region. So um it's not terribly small, but it's definitely smaller than, Portland, which is the northern part of the state. So our state is governed by the northern part of the state. Salem and Portland are about 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours north of our area. And then we're in this Southern Oregon area where there's just the conservative values are more prominent. And so we're all kind of sitting around going, I personally have fall more on the conservative side. And we're all sitting around going, the public schools and things that are going on in our culture don't align with a lot of our values. So I do think that's been a big part of the push in our area has been people wanting to have opportunities to really have a say in what their children are learning. And even people who, we're seeing, and I think this is across the country, and even, a lot of this is across the country, but there are people who maybe don't have strong values one way or another, who we're on the West Coast, and some of the stuff going on is pretty far beyond what's been normal across the country or normally accepted. So we're seeing people who maybe would never consider a private program or consider paying, and normally the public school meets a need for their family. And we're seeing families in our area who are just they have valid experiences where they're concerned about what's going on in the schools. So obviously getting out of public school would be a driving force. But then I think as this movement is growing and becoming more mainstream, and homeschooling in general is very prominent. And obviously COVID was a big driving factor where everybody got to experience a taste of homeschooling or something like it. A lot of there were people, and we had a lot of people come out of that saying, we realized, just like I did, years and years ago, I realized that I can have more of a active role, play more of an active role in my child's education. And now that they can go back to school, I don't want to send them, but I also don't want to homeschool by myself. So that's kind of where we have come in, is
Yeah.
helping them with that.
Yeah, I think it is. It's that more of the options like Arrows, Christian Academy, and these other micro schools and individualized programs that are sprouting in your area.
Right.
Very, very low cost, sort of a fraction of the
Mhm.
cost of traditional private options, makes this homeschooling or micro schooling option more accessible to more families. I think the other thing that really struck me, Becky, about the kind of Southern Oregon, Grants Pass, Medford area of Oregon, which is where you're at,
Mhm.
is that there is it seems like there's been a tradition of sort of learner centered education there for a while as well. Not only the sort of homeschool population that you mentioned, but there are some Waldorf private schools, Waldorf charter schools, there's Montessori private schools, Montessori inspired micro schools. So a real focus on child-centered learning. And I wonder, where you think that comes from.
Yeah, so I'm like 15 minutes from Ashland, Oregon, which is the kind of the last city on the very southern point on the border between Oregon and California. So I don't know, Ashland, I don't know if it still has a reputation across the country. I know Portland has a big reputation now, but Ashland used to be very well known too. And Ashland is really well known for um, just a freedom mentality and just across the board in every way. So depending on who you ask, the reputation may or may not be good, but Ashland has a huge, people travel from across the country to come to Ashland, and people move to Ashland on purpose because of the values. So I think that has played a role. And then Grants Pass. So yes, Grants Pass is about 30 minutes from where I'm at in Medford. And even the feel between where I'm at in Medford and Grants Pass is different. Like Grants Pass just has a really, Medford's not quite to that degree. They do have a really big, um, there's so many options, and they're very, very diverse. And there are a lot of people that want to participate in those and that are excited about it. So I don't know if it's people being attracted to that mentality or what it is, but there's definitely something going on. I agree.
Yeah, well, and I think it may help explain why alternative education, particularly these out of system models, are taking off in your area, because there has been this embrace of individualized learner
Mhm.
centered education for a while. And so
Yeah.
you now, we'll get into Arrows in just a second. You now have two locations of your Arrows Christian Academy. One is in the Medford area, Central Point, near where you are based, and then you have a second one in Grants Pass. So you're kind of spreading across the Rogue Valley with your program. So let's talk about what prompted you to move from a co-op to an established 2-day a week academy program.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I was the co-op director for 4 years, and that fourth year was when my little guy, who prompted us to homeschool, was a catalyst in that. At the time, he was about 3 or 4, and then, at that point, we had a toddler. So I had by then I had middle schoolers, and my oldest I think was ninth grade, and so I had like sixth grade, seventh grade, and ninth grade, and I had a 3-year-old and a toddler, and it was a lot, and the thought of trying to homeschool these boys and be a mom to babies and toddlers at the same time. So it was very much a personal thing, where it was like I do love being a part of their education. The private education, especially in the upper grades and then into high school in our valley, was just, I mean, I would have had to go back to work full time, some type of executive job to pay for it because it's just expensive. So it was either like they're going to have to go to public school, which is not the end of the world, and people do it all the time. So we considered like, okay, do they need to go back to public school? Because what we were doing was not working. Having 14, 15, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys home with, I'm trying to feed the babies and the toddler is interrupting everything. It was just not a good fit for our family. So I talked to my sister, and I think it was just happenstance. And she was at Costco on like a Tuesday, and she was homeschooling. And I was like, "What are you doing at Costco on a Tuesday? Aren't you homeschooling?" And she's like, "No, well, yeah, I homeschool. My kids are at their program." And so she told me about the program her kids went to on Tuesday, Thursday. And she's like, "They go 2 days a week, full time. It's great." And then I homeschool on the off days. And I was like, "Excuse me, what? What are you doing? That's not fair. You have to stay home with them." So I quickly started looking into that specific program in Southern California to figure out how are they doing that. And so they were one of few that had been doing it for a long time. They're going on like 25 years with that model. But then by then it was starting to become a little more common. So again, the internet is a great resource, and did some research and determined like, okay, this is really a thing. And so pitched it to the board, and they were like, "You're crazy, but if you want to do it, go for it." um and they were very supportive. So we tried it. The first year was kind of an experiment, just to see, are people even looking for this option. The first year was 2019, right before all the COVID shutdowns. So I initially it was, you know, very much geared from my own personal experience. Like, let's start this program for homeschool moms who are in particularly difficult situations, or maybe just don't want to be home 5 days a week and would love to partner with a program. So that was really the goal, was targeting, homeschool families who might want to participate in something more structured. And then the shutdowns happened in March of 2020. And obviously, we have attracted a lot more than just homeschool moms looking for additional support. But yeah, so the driving factor was my own personal experience, and figuring there are other people out there in similar situations, whether it's, needing to work part-time, or health. We have families in our program who have health challenges, where mom, again, is passionate about being a part of her child's education, her children, but she struggles with Lyme disease and other things too. So I wasn't the only one that needed that support, but that was the driving factor.
Yeah, and such a common trait for today's education entrepreneurs, that something isn't working, you're dissatisfied with whatever education option you're currently dealing with, you want to make a change, and you go off and build a new education
Right.
solution. And that's exactly what you
Yes.
did. And I think it's also important to provide some context about this hybrid homeschool movement. Professor Eric Warren at Kennesaw State University, who runs the National Hybrid Schools Project, has written extensively about this. He just hosted his second annual National Hybrid Schools Conference that you and I were both at. And he
Yes.
wrote a book about this, kind of tracing the hybrid school movement back to the 1990s, with this sort of format of a couple of days, typically 2 or 3 days off site in some leased space,
Mhm.
and then the rest of the time at home or in the community. So it really is the best of both, the best of homeschooling, and then
Right.
also providing that structure for academic classes and experienced educators. And that's really what you've built now, with nearly 200 students, 25 staff members, now 2 locations. What led you to open the second location, which was relatively recent for you?
It was, yeah. This school year that we just closed was our first year with the second location in Grants Pass. We have maxed out the space in Central Point at the church that we use, and it's a wonderful space. The church, you got to see it. It's beautiful. Um,
It really is
and it
stunning. Yeah.
has, yeah, it has a lot. It does have a lot of space. So we run about, I think this fall we'll run 12 classrooms. And again, it's one of our things, is like, we love the small um classroom size, having, just a few. We try to cap at 12. We usually end up with closer to 15, maybe 16 in most of our classrooms. So if we took more students and had larger classes, we could pack them in, but that's not really the vision either, and doesn't allow us to accomplish what we're trying to do. So um, we had maxed out the space, and we still had, we still receive inquiries. Like, at this point, we're in the first, it's June 1st today, and we're full in Central Point. And, normally you have interest that comes all through the summer. So I think it's just part of my, like, I hate saying no. I don't say no to anything, which is actually not a very good trait. So I have to turn over the budgeting and the control of the money for the teachers next year because they want this and that. I'm like, yes, do it. Absolutely. So the grants pass kind of came out of that, where I don't want to say no to people who want to be a part of something like this. And we had a handful of families that were driving, 20 or, well, it's at minimum 25, but for most of them, it was probably closer to 40 minutes from Grants Pass to get to our Central Point location. So we figured if we can get a location up there, and allow a handful of them to make the shift, that opens a little bit of space in Central Point, saves them the drive, and maybe picks up on the desire to be part of this program in Grants Pass too. So yeah, last year they had in Grants Pass, we had about 36, I think, and we're on target to maintain and hopefully grow a little bit more. Grants Pass is growing like wildfire in all of these different education options. So we'll see. I'm not sure if the need, and the expansion is going to hit like it did in Medford, or if it stays a little bit smaller. That was one of the things, I was thinking about today, like staying small is not a bad thing.
Well, and
So if it
small,
stays
36
small,
people
yes,
is still,
yes,
you're,
yeah,
small is relative. That
yes,
would be a
right.
big micro school.
Exactly. Depends on your definition of small. That's true. Yeah.
So, Becky, one of the things I think you've been masterful at is succession planning, basically, that you've kind of built this academy and helped to develop this incredible staff, 25 staff members. And you are increasingly delegating more of the day-to-day responsibilities and turning your sites into more of your consulting work that we'll get to in a minute. But how
Mhm.
are you able to do that so successfully, right? Because I hear so often from founders that is a fear, or at the very least a challenge when they're moving from their role as a founder to then passing the torch to the next team.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big question. There's a lot of, facets to consider to something like that. I don't know. And, like if you're catching on, so I have a very strong faith-based course. So if you really want to know, like I pray a lot and I think there's like miracles and I don't know. I don't know how it happens. So well, one of the things that I was thinking is, um, there's something about passing on the vision, because I could never put in enough work. Even, I'm still trying to homeschool part-time. And so I put in the work that I can when I can. Um, but even if I put in, 50 or 60 hours a week, every single week for the whole year, I just don't think I could put in enough time to writing enough manuals and trying to teach what I do. But if you can inspire and get them to catch the vision and the mission of what you're doing, and then empower them in their strengths, whether it's your administrators or your teachers, um, and give them some reign to run with it themselves, then I think that's been a big part of what I've been able to do. And when we, have meetings or someone will talk about, um I think if I had a meeting with a teacher recently and it took her a minute to get around to the point that she wanted to change some of the curriculum, that when she started with us 2 years ago, I sat with her and was like, this is what we've developed and this is what you'll use. And so she was hemming and hawing trying to get around to ask me, can I change this? Can I not use a large portion of this? And I finally caught on to what she was saying. And, she's worked for us for 2 years. I trust her. She does understand the goal and the vision of what we're trying to do. And as soon as I realized what she was getting at, I said, her name is Julie. I said, Julie, if you want to change it, you need to change it. Like, I could sit here for days and we could try to evaluate and explain, and you could try to help me buy in. But like, I trust you and I trust what you're doing. And I know that you have Arrow's best interest at heart, and you have your student and your family's best interest at heart. You do whatever it looks like to you. You just do it. And she was like, oh, okay, good. That's what I want to know. And like that shortened our meeting, which is kind of the, because I don't have enough time with all the staff and the delegation. So if you can figure out, what their strengths are, what you can trust them with, and then make sure that they understand the vision and the mission and empower them to run with it. And maybe, having some oversight, like they love knowing that I'm still around and available and can troubleshoot. And if they've run into something that they're struggling with, like I'm always available, but I'm not micromanaging, especially not like I did the first couple years. So,
Mm.
but that's another, like I said, there's a lot of facets that go into that. So
Yeah, I
the
mean,
not
you
micromanaging, is another one too.
you make it sound so easy. And and just of course, this vision of empowering your staff and not micromanaging them and being confident that the vision you've established is sustainable and that it will, continue beyond you. It seems so simple, but has it been difficult to let go?
Well, so yes, that's a whole nother facet. So empowering them with the mission vision, um, not micromanaging them, trusting them, even if they fail occasionally, like teaching them how to recover and having grace for them. So those are your kind of two. And then another facet of that is how you're structured. So, and this is such a huge thing. I'm in a lot of Facebook communities where the debate between should I form my organization, my program, should we form as an LLC or should we form as a nonprofit? So that really comes into play. Like, I don't mean to poke a bear, with this conversation, but it does come into play when you're considering and looking at like what I'm doing. Um, that was a huge factor in how this has turned out because we formed as a nonprofit. I learned what that meant. I don't know why, I think because I found Carol Top's resources and that's her main premise is helping people form nonprofit educational programs. So, but it made sense to me the more I looked into it. And if you form as a nonprofit, then obviously you're run and operated by a board. And a lot of people look at that and go, I'm not willing to give up, leadership potential to a board, to anyone. Like, this is my thing. This is my vision. I want to have control over that. And I get that. Like, I have all of those same tendencies. And so I'm not knocking that at all. That's what makes a good entrepreneur. But a lot of times an LLC or something, that is founded by just one, maybe two people, but often where it rises and falls with the founder.
Hmm.
So if there's like a succession plan and we want this to continue to grow, and what part of what I tell people is if you are an entrepreneur and you have this crazy drive to like do new things and then you do a new thing and you accomplish it and master it, and then you want to do a new thing. If you want that thing you did to keep going, like it's actually a good thing to have a board that you've passed that on to from the beginning and that partnered with you in it, who also invested their time and energy, because then it can keep going while you move on to doing something else. So it's not having a board is not necessarily a bad thing. It's intended to be like a bigger part of the organization and accomplish a bigger purpose. So that's part of, in your question of like how does that happen, a successful succession. um I was on the board. I was the founding board president. I was the founder and the director, so I held all of the lead role titles initially, and over the years I've chipped away at my seniority
Hmm.
intentionally, because I don't want to have that. And maybe part of that was because, my family life has just been um a big thing too. And so
Hmm.
the thought of having this all on me all the time that actually overwhelms me a little bit. So the thought of like, I don't want to be, I remember saying, it was like 7 years ago now, I don't want to be the board president. I'm already the program director. Someone else be the board president and carry some of that responsibility. So I resigned as board president. And then when I came on as paid staff for the academy, almost 4 years ago, then, it's best practice to not have paid staff on the board. Technically, the board's your boss.
Mm.
And that was another thing where it was like, I'm not going to stay on the board. I want this to run in a as healthy way as it can. So I'm going to run the academy. The board will empower me. They don't micromanage me. Um, but I'm not on the board anymore.
Mhm.
So it's very uncommon, but it's very healthy. But it does go against some of the entrepreneurial spirit. But it can be done. It takes a measure of like being willing to put yourself aside and see the organization as its own entity. Um, but like I
Yeah.
said, empowering the people in it with the mission and inspiring them with your vision. Like I've never had, sometimes there's this concern of, will what if they get rid of me? What if they don't? Do they have the power to get rid of me? They're not going to get rid of you. Look at you. Like you're the one doing all of it. You're the one that's empowering, motivating, inspiring. Like they want you there. I've never once in 9 years had that concern. I've never seen that happen where someone who is truly passionate about it, um, they want you there and they want to support you. So, but it's taking there is some personal risk. It feels like a personal risk of, I'm going to hand my baby over, even in some measure, to other people. And I don't know how I feel about that. But I have had to be okay with that. And that's part of, long answer to your question, but that's part of the success of being able to pass this on and know that there are plenty of days where I'm not there anymore. And it just like clockwork, it just goes and it's beautiful. Um, but you have to be willing to let go.
And these are all bits of advice that you now share with founders and prospective founders across the country through your consulting organization, nonprofit edsolutions.com, where you help others to essentially follow in your footsteps, people who want to create similar models, have questions about organizational structure or succession planning or hiring and curriculum and all kinds of things. I wonder if you can share a little bit about what you're seeing with clients across the country and what they're building and why.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I love what I get to do with the consulting, and that does go to my point of like, if you're a true entrepreneur, it's only a matter of time before you go, hey, something new, I love it. And that's exactly what happened in my case. I love this opportunity to take what I've been doing and on a broader scale encourage and empower like founders, not just my staff, but now it's founders too. Um, okay, so what am I seeing across the country? There's I um was super blessed to have kind of a jumping off point from Carol Top, who I read her book, the very first day that I started Eros.
And
And
what was
then
the title of that book?
yes, how to start a homeschool co-op and not burn out. So
Great.
even though because what I was going to say is a lot of what I'm seeing across the country is um they're not just homeschool co-ops anymore. But that book, even if you're starting something more than a homeschool co-op, is still, there's a lot of really good information in there, and it's not a huge read. So it's a great resource. Until I write my book, I just send people to that one. So like, I don't have time to write a book. Maybe someday. So I used her book, but she retired about 2 years ago. And well, no, it was about a year ago. She started making noise about retiring maybe 3 years ago. And so I was blessed to have a jump start by her mentoring underneath her and kind of help carry the torch with her. So I bring that up because I just talked to her yesterday, and her focus has always been like nonprofit homeschool co-ops, or maybe like a 2-day co-op, because that's what people have been starting for a long time, just these little parent run all volunteer co-op type things. It's very uncommon. Maybe there's like a science teacher that comes in, but man, that's not what we're seeing as much anymore, and those are still starting, but we're seeing I'm seeing so much more. The majority of my clients are all starting something more than that. And it may be geared, and it's hilarious because the terminology is just all over the place. So I had a gal reach out to me and she's starting a micro school, and she talks about it as her school, and the all it's very schooly. And as I'm helping her fill out some paperwork, we really have to make sure like that we say the right terminology. Like, are you technically a school? Are you forming as a school in your state? And all these things. And we got down to the nitty gritty, and she gave me more detail. And I was like, oh, you're not forming a school. Like, you're forming a 2-day hybrid or homeschool partnership, but that's definitely not a private school. Like, it was a 2-day, and all the kiddos are registered in their state as homeschool families. So it was a far cry from a traditional private school. So it's funny because depending on the terminology, it's all over the place, but the majority of them are all starting something that's a little bit more than the traditional parent-run homeschool co-op. So somewhere between a 2 to 3 day a week, and then a fair amount of micro schools. Micro schools are definitely big. They're not big, they're micro, but they're getting more prevalent.
So you're
Uh,
seeing that growth, that momentum. I mean, I guess what is your sense of the future of these more unconventional learning programs, out of system, sometimes homeschool based or micro schools? What is your sense of the future of this model?
Oh, I I think, I mean, obviously it's on an upward swing. I can't imagine that it will ever swing back from that. I think it will only continue to be more normalized, more acceptable to have that, to have options for parents to have options. I don't know that the traditional public school option will ever completely go away. I highly doubt that, but I think parents having an option between, for so long, it's either your kids go to public school, full-time private school, or you homeschool full-time alone at home 5 days a week, maybe with a 1-day parent-run co-op. Like, those were your only options. So there's so many like little in between those, all of those 3 points. There's all these wonky in between options now. And maybe they've been there, but I certainly didn't know about them. I know in our area, especially in Medford, and I've been here 20 some years, 26 years now. I was not aware, and I couldn't find any. And that's part of why, especially in the Medford area, I think our program has grown because there wasn't options. So I do think that it's continued growth, continued success. I'm curious to see, and depending on who you talk to, you can talk to kind of hardcore homeschool, um, hardcore homeschoolers. You can talk to hardcore homeschool advocates, leaders in the homeschool movement, especially statewide leaders of homeschool organizations who are very, very leery of this more modernization and this more creative, innovative options, because it does draw a lot of, I don't know how much it draws, but there's the potential for it to draw scrutiny on homeschooling and just more evaluation on like, what are all these things? What are all these people doing? So personally, I don't feel that the concern of it drawing attention to the movement is a big enough concern to not do it. I feel like there are so many kids that are being served in ways that they need, like in smaller class sizes with teachers that are actually excited to do what they're doing and not hampered by all the regulations and restrictions that they're experiencing in traditional public school and even private school settings. When you can get a teacher in a place where she can be free to do what she's good at, and he, all of my teachers are female right now, so I'm saying she, but when you could get them in a place where they can really thrive, then those kiddos benefit from it. And to say that we shouldn't be offering these options just because it may draw potential scrutiny on the homeschool movement or on this new microschool movement. I think the kids are worth it. I think the kids that are benefiting, the families that are benefiting from it, are worth the risk. And I love, like, what Mike Donnelly is doing at Yes Every Kid, recognizing that that's probably what's coming down the pike. and he's setting up, he mentioned when I talked to him the other day that he's looking to hire more attorneys. So they're looking to build up, similar to the homeschool movement had HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and they still do, to fight for the rights of homeschooling and for families to be able to do that successfully without government interference. I love that's what Yes Every Kid is wanting to do for the micro school movement, to make sure that there's opportunity for that to come. Because I think that's, if there was anything coming down the pike, in the future of these more innovative models, um, because I don't think it's going to stop growing. I think that the only potential threat to its being able to be successful is, what are the state governments going to do with all of these wonky programs that don't check all of their boxes?
Yeah.
Um, so we'll see what happens, in that regard. But again, I don't think it's worth holding back and not running them and not starting them, because we're not sure, what that might trigger or what that's going to do in the future. Like the kids are worth it, so we'll do it anyways.
I completely agree. I love the work that Mike Donnelly and the Yes Every Kid Foundation are doing to provide legal advocacy support for everyday entrepreneurs like you who are creating these, I love your term, wonky in between options. I think we're often hard
Yes.
pressed to find good terminology for what it is we're
Sorry.
talking about. And I think that's it, wonky in between options. But it's true. It's
Yes.
looking at the space in between what we think of as conventional homeschooling, conventional public school, conventional private school. What is that wonky in between space? And
Yes.
it's limitless, really. I mean, it really the options, the opportunities there are endless.
Yes.
And you are very much a part of that, and a part of now helping others to create similar options across the country. So, Becky, once again, what are the best sort of websites or contact information for my listeners and viewers to know to get in touch with you and follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you did mention my website, nonprofit. The business name is Nonprofit Educational Solutions. Nonprofitedsolutions.com is where you can find me with my consulting work. And I'm slowly building a content library with blog posts, and I create blog posts based on the most prominent questions that I get right now. And the goal eventually, is obviously to create more content, but right now there's some really pertinent blog posts up there. So like I said, one of the biggest questions is, do I have to be a nonprofit? Why should I even consider that? So there's a blog post about that that's worth maybe taking a look at, and some other things. um I hate to bog founders down with the legal and the technical aspects of you're running a business. Even a micro school is really running a business. So I have a blog post on that. Do I even have to do anything? Am I even really running a business? And it kind of walks you through, like, maybe consider these things. At the end of the day, it is your choice to decide how you want to operate. But I like to put that information out there. And there's a balance, because, like, I didn't know all of this stuff when I started. And I don't want to burden founders so much with, I need to figure out all the technical and legal, and you should know enough to get your feet under you. But then, to some degree, like, you learn as you go. And so there's a balance in there. But part of what I love to offer is kind of that in between, because you could do it on your own. And you and I have talked about, these, a lot of you out there, homeschool founders or program micro school founders, you're very scrappy. And so you figure out how to do things on your own and not have to pay people for it. And, like, good on you. I'm the same way. So I love catering to that, where I try to keep my services super affordable, because I know you're not willing to pay for it. But there are some things where it's like, okay, you got to get a little bit of help. But I'm certainly not going to go see an attorney. And so there's somewhere in between there. And I guess that's fitting with what I do. I find those little somewhere in between. There's some help there. So, okay. So, long story, that's my website. My email is just becky@nonprofited.com. If you wanted to reach out that way too. And then, yeah, feel free to visit arrowschc.com. ARROWSCHC.com is the program that we run in Southern Oregon. So the co-op has a page and the academy has a page on there too. Okay.
Becky Abrams, it's so wonderful to talk with you. I'm so inspired by what you've built with your co-op and with Arrows, and what you continue to build with your consulting practice. And thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was fun.